In this video, we're going to take a look at the evolutionary history of the animal kingdom, looking back on the geologic time scale. It's believed that animals first evolved probably over 600 million years ago in the ocean. So MYA means million years ago. And we know this based off of fossil records. And there are some animals and tissues that don't fossilize well. So it's possible that they could have evolved before that, and we just don't have the fossil record to show that to us. To date, we have identified over 1 million extant species. And extant just means that these are species that still exist today. So still exist on Earth today. So it's not including the animal species that existed in the past that have now become extinct. So extant means they're still alive, they're still, we can go out and find a live specimen somewhere. Extinct means that there are no longer any living individuals of that organism on this planet. Now, we have identified over 1 million, but it's estimated that there are 3 to 30 million species out there. So it's possible that there are 29 million different species of animals that we just haven't found yet, or we just haven't discovered that they're a different species. So the oldest fossils that have been found of creatures that we think are animal-like, so sponge-like creatures, are from approximately 650 million years ago. And these were fossils that were found in southern Australia, and they're thought to be the oldest animals, although I guess there is some debate as to whether these fossils actually represent animals, or there could be fossils that are even older that we just haven't identified yet, or there could have been animals that were around before that that did not leave fossils. But for now, it's kind of what we think are the oldest animals. And it's not on this picture here, but we're talking about 650 million years ago. So we're talking about something kind of around this timeline here. Just slightly more contemporary or more current to the cryogenian fossils are the Ediacaran biota. And these are found here on this here. So just slightly before or more recent to what we talked about on the previous slide. So between 635 and 543 million years ago, we found fossils that have been dated back to that time. And these fossils lead us to believe that animals probably evolved from protists. Once again, these fossils were found in southern Australia. They are millimeters to centimeters long, so they're not very big, although the fossils do show these feather-like structures that can be up to a meter long, and a meter is just 100 centimeters. Or we could say about 3 feet. You can see that feather-like structure here. They're not actually sure that it was a feather, but that's kind of their best explanation as to what it looks like. There are no extant currently living species, so all of the fossils are representing extinct species. And it used to be thought that these were the oldest animals in the fossil record until the cryogenian fossils were discovered. And those are the ones that we talked about on the previous slide. Now, about 500 million years ago, or between 542 and 488 million years ago, we have the Cambrian period right here. And when it comes to animals, they actually call it the Cambrian explosion. And we're not talking about an explosion like something literally exploding. We just mean that there was an increased diversity of animals in the fossil record. So it just means that all of a sudden, as we looked at these fossils, there were a lot more of these animal-like fossils in this Cambrian period. And although there are no extant species, so no species that still survive today that also survived back in the Cambrian era, a lot of the fossils showed body forms that are similar to what we see in today's animals. So a lot of the species looked like things like mollusks and worms and echinoderms. And kind of one fossil that you're maybe familiar with are trilobites. And so trilobites were very common or a dominant species in the Cambrian era. They were likely arthropods. They had these kind of segmented, hard-shelled, like exoskeletons. And they are the first fossils that show an animal that likely had some sort of vision to it. And the trilobite this is the fossil of what a trilobite looks like. There are a couple of different hypotheses as to what could have caused this kind of increased evolution of animals during the Cambrian period. So it could be due to changes in the environment. So there was increased atmospheric oxygen, probably due to more plants also evolving. There could have been increased calcium in the oceans, which could have provided a lot of shelled organisms need calcium to make their shells. The continental shelf, due to maybe the ocean levels, had potentially shallow lagoons or pools that helped to support some larger aquatic animals, but also kind of keep them separated from each other, which could cause them to develop or evolve into different species. The increased animal diversity found in the Cambrian era could also be explained due to ecological changes. So basically changes in the food web. So potentially more plants were evolving, and as more plants were evolving, more herbivores evolved, and as more herbivores evolved, then more carnivores evolved. And so basically the more branches you have in this food web, the more branches the food web can also support. And so you end up with this kind of diversity in predator-prey interactions. There could also be an increased competition for resources. So if we're just seeing more and more organisms on the planet, now they're competing for things like food and sunlight and shelter. And so they can evolve different kind of adaptations or characteristics that maybe help them survive or give them some sort of evolutionary advantage over another organism. The Cambrian explosion could also be explained by the evolution of the Hox genes, which allowed for more morphologies. And morphology, remember, just means structure. And so it's possible that as these Hox genes were evolving and developing and being copied, it was allowing for different body types and plans to be produced. And this Cambrian explosion could be a factor of all of the above or none of the above. Remember, these are all just hypotheses based on what we know and what we think could have happened, but we don't know for sure what could have caused this kind of increased evolution of animals during this era of geologic time. It's also possible that this increased evolution that we call the Cambrian explosion isn't really indicative of the diversity of animals on the planet at the time. So it could be that there was a lot more diversity in animals prior to this Cambrian period, but not all tissues fossilized well. So it could be that they were softer bodied animals that didn't have skeletons or shells. And so they existed, but we don't know about them because they were not preserved in the fossil record. Or it's possible that we haven't discovered these older fossils yet. So there could be fossils from, prior to the Cambrian explosion that would show us that there were a lot of animals that were actually around, earlier than that, but we just haven't found them yet. So we don't really know. After the Cambrian period, we had additional evolution happening. So evolution has been happening constantly since the Earth first developed. During the Ordovician period, we started to see the first land plants, which allowed aquatic animals to now move onto land as well. So imagine if you're an herbivore and you live in the water, because that's where the aquatic plants are. Now there are plants on land, and so the animals could then evolve to also move on land because their food source was now on land. And we're looking here, so remember we're after the Cambrian period, so we're looking at the Ordovician era right here. Later on in the Paleozoic era, so we've been talking about the Cambrian and Ordovician here, but later on during the rest of this era, we also had a lot of continental plate movement. And so essentially the continents were moving around and essentially separating some land masses from each other and then pushing other land masses closer to each other. This could have affected evolution by essentially separating animals in a population from each other. And as they're separated, then each new population or separated population can then go through evolution and ultimately develop into a different species. There were also a lot of changes in temperature and moisture on the planet. And during this time in the fossil record, they started to see things like limbed appendages in amphibians, so, things like arms and legs, and also epidermal scales. So those are just the scales that you see on the skin of reptiles, also developed during this time. Evolution is constantly happening, and evolution basically occurs and causes speciation and extinction. So, speciation is just the production of new species. So, new species evolve, and extinction means that species stop existing. So, species die out or no longer exist. And both of these processes occur due to changes in the environment. And so certain environmental changes might actually produce new habitats or new niches, which helps to support speciation. But major kind of catastrophic environmental changes can also cause mass extinctions. So things such as volcanic eruptions or meteor strikes. And this graphic here is showing you a graph of geologic time, so millions of years ago, going back to, about 600 million years ago here. And then this is looking on the y-axis, we're looking at the extinction rate. And so extinction is a normal natural process, but you can see that there are these periods where we have what we call mass extinctions. And mass extinctions just means that a lot of organisms during that time went extinct kind of all at the same time. And probably the most well-known mass extinction is the one that caused the dinosaurs to go extinct. So let's take a closer look at some of these mass extinctions and how it affected the evolution of animals. So at the end of the Permian period, so we're looking at this mass extinction right here, 95% of species that existed on the planet at that time went extinct. So 95. So imagine if 95% of the plants and animals and insects surrounding you just all of a sudden disappeared. That's basically what happened at the end of this region. Now, interestingly, by all of, this kind of large extinction of all these other organisms, it then kind of opened up this environment or this habitat or this niche for the evolution of dinosaurs. And so we see dinosaurs kind of show up in that next period there. So dinosaurs here. There was also an increased evolution of plants, especially those kind of seedless vascular plants that we've talked about before. But then at the end of the Cretaceous period, so that's right here, this would be the mass extinction event that killed the dinosaurs. And we know that this was caused by a meteor strike that essentially, in a very short period of time, it really changed the environment of Earth. So it decreased the amount of sun that was hitting the surface of the Earth. It changed the chemical makeup of the air. It also killed off many plants. And when the plants died, the herbivores died. When the herbivores died, the carnivores died. So just a lot of kind of chain reactions happening here. But after the dinosaurs went extinct is when they started seeing more of the warm-blooded mammals showing up in the fossil record. So it's possible that the extinction of the dinosaurs then made the environment conducive to mammals being able to survive and evolve. It could also be due to changes in climate and weather. So after this time, so remember we're talking about after the Cretaceous mass extinction, we also started seeing more flowering plants, which meant that we had more pollinating insects because there's probably some coevolution there, and also more birds. We have the continental plates that are still shifting, and so those continents are moving around, which can contribute to isolation. So imagine if you have two continents that are next to each other, and let's say you've got an organism that lives near where these two continents exist. And so they're able to move back and forth between these two continents. But now these two land masses separate. And the organisms that were on this one are now stuck in their own little island over here. And the ones over here are now stuck in their own little island. And then over time, these land masses are going to continue to move and change. And as they're moving and changing, the environment's changing. And so the temperature might be changing, the amount of moisture, access to fresh water, et cetera, et cetera. And so eventually you end up with, maybe these organisms have now evolved. So I'm just going to change them to triangles to show that they went from being circles to triangles. So obviously this is just my little cartoony demonstration of this. And then these organisms that were on this other landmass have now evolved in a different way. And so I'm going to draw them as squares. So as these continents are moving around, we're seeing new ecosystems that are supporting different types of life. There's also an ice age that happened. And so the ice age, maybe killed off some of the more tropical animals and species, but supported more species that did well in colder environments.